Hello, I am Baal Kadmon, and I'd like to thank you for watching and or listening to this video. I just want to thank all of you who purchased my book Between Heaven and Earth, Unveiling the Hidden Mysticism of the Targumim. It brought it up to the bestseller list in Kabbalah for a few times. It's still on the bestseller new releases for Kabbalah. At one point it was number 1, and now I believe it's number 3, but it changes back and forth over the hours. So thank you so much for that. In a previous video, I actually shared a chapter from that book about the giving of the Torah at Sinai, and I showed you just how different the Targum is, the story in the Targum about that event, and how much more context there was, and how the giving of the Torah was, or rather the acceptance of the Torah by the Jews was not exactly voluntary. And I was expecting a lot more hate mail about this, but I only got one email, and it wasn't hate, but it was someone who said, we really shouldn't be telling non-Jews about this type of stuff. And I'm like, why? First of all, I don't consider myself Jewish. I used to think that, right? I used to have that belief about myself many, a long, long time ago. I gave that up in the 90s, the affiliation with any religion, not just Judaism. I just happened to be brought up in a mostly Jewish household, so I happen to know a lot about this stuff, because this is things that I was studying. Now, there is this concept in Judaism that you don't want to share certain things with non-Jews. I mean, it's written in the Talmud, it's written because they think somehow it makes it more profane. And I have to admit, there's probably some sense of, this is chosen knowledge. Only the chosen should learn this. And I think that that's a big mistake. And if you've read any of my other books or taken any of my courses, you realize that I do not adhere to that concept. And I think that it shortchanges the world to have this type of information hidden from other people and only relegated to one group of people. There's nothing wrong with people having their own traditions and everything like that. That's great. But I think that there's wisdom in every single tradition that should be shared. I'm not saying you have to adopt these things. I'm not saying go out and, now become Jewish, become Christian, become Muslim, whatever. I'm just saying I think because we share humanity, we should share the knowledge too. And I think it's very important. So that's why one of my goals is to bring information that would be otherwise inaccessible to a broader audience. And from what I've heard, people do appreciate this, and I appreciate all the feedback. But you're not going to find me gatekeeping anything because I'm not one of those types of people. So anyway, I want to read another chapter from the book that I think that you'd really be interested in. And again, this book is available on Amazon. The audiobook is still in the approval cycle. It should have been approved by now, but it looks like there's 4 stages of the approval. So it's the last 2 stages that are still pending. I'm not sure why it's taking ACX so long, but it is what it is. So in this chapter that I'm going to read now, it is about the Tower of Babel. The story of where they built the tower to go and essentially see God. Well, the Bible doesn't really give us a lot of context about it, but the Targumim do. I mean, not only do they do so, they add a whole other story to it, which I think is fascinating. So what I'm going to do now is provide you with that chapter. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. And again, the book is available at baalkadmon.com/Targum. And this is chapter 5 from the book. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 5. The Tower of Babel and the Cosmic Rebellion. The Tower of Babel narrative in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, is one of the most interesting stories in the Hebrew Bible. While the standard biblical text focuses on the scattering of humanity as a consequence of their collective pride, the Targumim, particularly Targum Neofiti and Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, expand this narrative in very interesting and profound ways. When I first read the account many years ago, I was astonished by it. But first, let's read the standard verses. Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Now, humanity, apparently according to the Standard Bible, speaks a single language and settles on the plain of Shinar. The people decided, of course, to build a city and a tower with its top to the heavens to make a name for themselves and avoid being scattered. God descends to see the tower and city, observing that their unity is, he deems it dangerous. Again, the God of the Old Testament does not want unity. To counter their ambition, God confuses their language, causing them to abandon the tower and scatter across the globe. Now the narrative concludes with the naming of the city Babel, which means confusion. Again, we see God is petrified of mankind attaining knowledge. God is afraid that if humanity gets too enlightened, it may threaten the equilibrium of the divine realms. If more knowledge even threatens the divine realm, that means humanity does have the capacity to know so much as to give God a headache. Yet another reason why the Gnostics may have gotten it right about the God of the Old Testament being the demiurge. Now let's go a bit deeper. We're going to look at the Targum Neofiti, and we'll see how it transforms the story of Babel by introducing theological and mystical elements that you simply cannot find in the standard text. It provides clear elements of divine judgment, but at the same time hinting at a much larger metaphysical struggle that God is petrified of. Let's look at Targum Neofiti on Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 2. Now all the inhabitants of the earth had one language and one speech, and they used to converse in the language of the sanctuary by which the world was created in the beginning. And when they caused their hearts to move away from the Lord, they found a valley in the land of Babel and settled there. Now, the most interesting aspect here is the language of the sanctuary. This, of course, is Hebrew. This verse explicitly mentions Hebrew as the original language of humanity, the very language of creation itself. This detail introduces this common mystical dimension, implying not only that humanity once shared a sacred connection to divine creation through language, but also the common idea that God used the Hebrew language to create the universe. So the eventual confusion of languages represents not just a disruption of communication on a general and basic level, but a severing of their connection to the divine order. This is something we can't even glean in the standard biblical text. I find the Targum on this verse quite profound. But let's look at the next example. Targum Neofiti, Genesis chapter 11, verses 5 through 7. And the glory of the Shekhinah of the Lord was revealed to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, Behold, one people, and all of them have one language, and behold, now they have begun to act, and now nothing they plan to do will be held back from them. Come now, and I will be revealed, and there we shall confound their tongues, so that one will not give heed to the language of the other. Unlike the Hebrew Standard Text, Targum Neofiti specifies that God will be revealed. He says, Come now, and I will be revealed, and there we shall confound their tongues, so that one will not give heed to the language of the other. Now, this framing the divine descent as an act of retribution, that's how it's framing this. Okay, so let us now look at how the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan handles this story. This one expands the narrative even further and infusing it with a lot more details. It provides a much more vivid account of the motivations behind building the tower and the nature of the divine judgment that ensued. Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, Genesis chapter 11, verse 4. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its tops reaching towards the heavens. Let us make ourselves an idol at its top, and let us put a sword in its hand, and let it draw up battle formations against him, before we are scattered from upon the face of the earth. Now, unlike the standard text, which portrays human ambition as this vague, let us make a name for ourselves, this Targum explicitly frames the project as an act of rebellion. The builders intend to rebel against the Lord and undo divine judgment by resisting their forefathers' scattering after the flood. Now, this is suggesting to me that Babel was not merely a physical structure, but a symbolic act of defiance against the divinity and the divine authority of God. This makes sense since God is unnerved by this. He is clearly threatened. Now let's read Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, Genesis chapter 11, verses 7 through 8. Then the Lord said to the 70 angels that stand before him, Come then, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's language. The Memra of the Lord was revealed against the city, and with it 70 angels corresponding to 70 nations, each having the language of his people and the characters of its writing in his hand. He scattered them thence upon the face of all the earth into 70 languages, so that one did not know what the other one said, and they killed one another, and they stopped building the city. Now, this Targum introduces 70 angels, which assists in the confusion of languages. This reflects, of course, a rabbinic and mystical tradition that associate the 70 nations of the world with the 70 angelic rulers appointed over them. We see this preliminarily referenced in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8, and that states, When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all humankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the children of Israel. Now, we do not see any reference to angels, but in the Greek version of this verse, we see the reference to the angels, and it says, When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the nations according to the number of the angels of God. Now, this Greek translation, this is the Septuagint of that same verse, this Greek translation also matches the Dead Sea Scrolls on this verse. But here's the problem with this whole thing. If you recall, the Bible and the Targum both say that everyone spoke the same language, right? We only see the creation of language after God intervenes. But if we look back at the Targum, it states, The Memra of the Lord was revealed against the city, and with it 70 angels corresponding to 70 nations, each having the language of his people and the characters of its writing in his hand. Now, how did these angels each have the language of his people? This implies the languages already existed prior to the scattering of the people at the Tower of Babel, again indicating a very heavy element of predestination here. Moving on. In both the Targum Neofiti and Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, humanity's unity is initially portrayed as sacred, reflected in their shared use of the quote-unquote language of the sanctuary. Now, this unity ties them to the divine order of creation. However, as we saw, their ambition to reach the heavens and rebel against the Lord corrupts this unity and transforms into a disaster of biblical proportions, pun intended. So when we look deeper into this, the confusion of languages is not merely a punishment, but a true and deep fracture in the cosmos. The loss of a single sacred language symbolizes humanity's descent from a state of divine harmony into division and separation from the divine. So as you can see, the Targumim transfer the Babel narrative into a drama of literally cosmic proportions, one that reflects the tug of war between order and chaos, and how we as humans try to bridge that gap between the earthly and the divine, but ultimately fail. But we fail not by our own hand, but the hand of God. The God of the Old Testament does not want humanity to be elevated in any way that threatens him. That might sound simplistic, but the texts speak for themselves. Let us move on to the next topic. Well, I hope you enjoyed that chapter. I think it was very interesting, especially how it talks about the language of the sanctuary and all of these other interesting details that you just can't get in the Old Testament. You have to read the Targumim for that. So again, this book is available at baalkadmon.com/Targum, and it's both Kindle and paperback. And like I said, the audiobook should be available any day now. On another note, I will have the Jinn program in pre-release probably within the next week or so. And I'm really looking forward to getting that out to you. I just finished today the audio portion of this, of the program. There's quite a few audios there. Obviously, they're going to be videos, but I do it in stages. My workflow is I write, I double check to make sure everything is good, and then I narrate the audio, and then I produce the video. So there's several steps, and I'm essentially here all day, just sitting here, producing these things. And aside from working out, taking out the dogs, and maybe having a little bit of a life, this is pretty much what I'm doing all the time. And of course, I do trading and here and there. So everything is pretty much done at this desk, and I call this room my office. Where people are always going into their bedroom saying, "Oh, this is where the magic happens." No, actually, my office is where the magic happens, literally and figuratively. So that's it for this video. I will see you in a future video. And again, you can get the book at baalkadmon.com/Targum. Thank you so much for those who've already purchased it. Again, it's hit the bestseller list, and I'm really, really honored that you would choose that book and learn from what I have to say. Anyway, that's it. See you soon. So mote it be.